Hi guys, thanks for joining us on our second episode of our Venture Finance podcast. Today, we're going to be discussing a little bit more about the seed round. And I'm going to be joined by Brad Furber, the CEO of Airy Advisors. And before we kick off, I just want to remind everyone, remember to subscribe, click the bell button so you're notified when we release new episodes. And more importantly, share this content with your colleagues, your friends, and any founder that's really looking to raise a seed round. Brad, how you doing?
I'm doing great. You?
I'm really good, thank you. This is a topic that I'm really excited to discuss because, as you know, I'm on the front line. I speak to founders pretty much every day. And for the early stage startups, this is something that I spend a lot of time sort of clarifying points on. But it's a really interesting topic, so I'm really excited to get started.
Likewise.
So Brad, to begin with, I think for the purposes of our audience, can you clearly define what a seed round is?
Sure. So the seed round, it's usually the startup has at least a minimum viable product. It may even have some product market fit, or it's on the road to product market fit. There's a go-to-market strategy, and there's a desire to try and raise usually somewhere between $2 to $5 million to take the venture to the next stage, to really prove that you can get product market fit, that you can scale. You know, you have customer acquisition cost metrics that you believe are defensible. That's what the seed round is.
Okay. Now, thanks for clarifying, because some of the founders that I speak with, there is a bit of confusion between what a pre-seed round is and what a seed round is. So how would you say?
Well, yeah, and so sometimes a pre-seed round is taken in small chunks. So you might start off with, we're going to raise a couple 300,000. Maybe we're using a safe with a cap. And the nice thing about those is you can just take the money in month by month in small chunks. And I've seen companies just keep raising money for quite a long time, and they might even get up to 2 million. But a seed round is really, it's a separate stage where typically at that point, you're also approaching institutional investors.
That leads me perfectly onto the next question. I often get founders who have said, look, we've approached VCs. We've sent our pitch decks to the VCs. We've sent emails, and we've reached out to them. And they all say the same thing in terms of the response, which is the VC will come back and say, it's too early. It's early stages for you. Come back to us in the future once you've established XYZ. So for a seed round, you've mentioned institutional investors. So can you just clarify, who are the best types of investors to approach for your seed round?
Personally, I'm of the view that a seed round should include both angels and some kind of institutional investor. And I actually think you're better off if you can start to bring on board, a micro VC, or maybe it's a family office or something like that. Why do I say that? I would say because the seed round at 2 to 5 million, in the current market, which isn't as frothy. I think having access to institutional capital will probably help you post seed round, get to the Series A. But yeah, I would say a mix. So you still want the angels, probably get 2, 3, 4, good angels who are willing to roll up their sleeves. Those angels, if they're comfortable, will typically work with the management team to get the pitch deck and the opportunity in front of others, so a warm introduction. And so you're kind of doing a little bit of both. You're doing angels with a micro VC, or even a real VC that has maybe a side fund that does early stage stuff.
It's a combination of the both. Is it possible to raise a seed round with just angel investors?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of entrepreneurs that we talk to are afraid of VCs. For some reason, there's like, I don't want to work with the evil VCs because they're going to take over my company or something. I don't personally subscribe to that. I think VCs, they're in the business of deploying capital. They're typically not in the business of trying to run your company. I mean, they got multiple investments, so the whole point, I think, the good VCs is to identify, good entrepreneurs that they can trust and work with and deploy capital. The VCs are in the business of deploying capital. But for whatever reason, some people that we talk to and work with would prefer. And I think it really is because they don't want to give up control. So if you have, say, 25 angels, no one person really has a lot of influence. And for some people, I think they like that.
That's actually a very valid point. So imagine a founder who's now in a seed round and they're contemplating, how much control to keep of the company. Typically, how much equity should be given up in a seed round?
That is the $1 million question. Like everything, it's negotiable. I think a minimum of 10% and up to, say, 25%. And it really depends on the market dynamics. But if you're bringing in sophisticated angels, sophisticated institutions, they're probably on a $2 to $5 million raise. I think you got to be prepared to give up, honestly, 25%, maybe slightly less.
And that would give the founder, at least 70%.
Well, it depends on how much you gave up in the pre-seed.
That is a good point.
Yeah. So, every round dilutes you. And, the general rule of thumb is every round real round, you end up, it's hard to say. There's no general rules. There was a frothy market, 2020, 2021, even early 2022, where valuations were high. We're talking about seed rounds. I will say the correction that you've seen in the late stage VC, say growth venture, in the public markets so far hasn't really, at least if you believe the data, hasn't really crept into the seed stage. So the valuations at the seed stage so far are kind of the same as they were, even in 2021.
That's interesting. Yeah. So you've also mentioned, you've given a range, 2 to 5 million. Is that typically how much founders should be looking to raise in a seed round, or does it depend? No,
obviously you want to raise the capital that you need to execute a plan over a period of time, let's say 18 to 24 months. And I think when people just talk about rounds, if you just, what's the average or what's the median, 2 to 5 million, I would say both in the United States and in Europe, that would be typically what's considered a seed round.
That's a good one. In fact, I had a conversation with a founder just last week, and he was looking for some guidance and advice on his seed round, right? And his impression was, in a pre-seed round, from one investor, he managed to raise $20,000, right? Which he achieved within a week. So now his impression is he should be able to raise up to $500,000 to $1 million within 3 months. Okay. So Brad, in your own professional experience, is that realistic? And what is the timescale you should give yourself to raise a seed round?
Okay, so your question was somebody raised $20,000 in a week. Yeah. Okay, well, that's just a data point. You could raise $20,000 tonight if you go to the right bar. If you're in Davos, probably a lot better. But if you just look at the normal, a seed round of 2 to 5 million, it would take how many? $120,000 tickets to get to 2 million. So really, in order to get 2 to 5 million, you're going to need a higher average ticket price. That is to say, even though the angels might still come in with a minimum investment of, typically you'd say minimum of 50, sometimes you let them in for 25, but whatever, 25, 50. You got to aggregate a lot of investors to get to 2 to 5 million, which is why at the seed round, you also want to bring in larger ticket investors. Maybe you raise, let's say it's a $5 million deal. You might do kind of a 80-20 rule. 20% of the investors in terms of number generate 80%. And then you fill it in with hopefully some value-added smart money angels. So it's not just any Tom, Dick, and Harry. It's that's in my experience the best way to do it.
I'm still a little bit unsure about the length of time it should take, especially considering...
Oh yeah, the length of time. I was at the Web Summit, and somebody was up on stage. I mentioned this in our last podcast, and it stuck with me, which was the days of the founder-priced party round are over. And by that, I mean, in the current market, which is a lot more disciplined, everyone is taking more time to do due diligence, right? So the thing where you're just going to create FOMO, hey, it's a hot deal. If you don't get us your money, you might not get in. I think that those days are in the rearview mirror, at least for the time being. It's really a question of effort. So it might, assuming I mean, if you read current articles, it's not just based on our experience. This is a big job, 5 hours a day, which is, more than, it's half the CEO's time. And you gotta go through what is effectively a funnel marketing strategy. And honestly, I think 3 months would be, if you do everything right, would be pretty good. If you don't put in the effort or you make mistakes, it could be 6 months to never. Right. I mean, but if you're serious, current market, I would say maybe 3 months, three, 4, 5, 6 months.
In the current market, okay, about 6 months. What's also come to light from the conversations I've had is founders haven't really anticipated how much time it takes to fundraise. Because for the early stage companies, you find that the founders often wear multiple hats. They're doing so many jobs to keep the operation going. But when it comes to fundraising, maybe they haven't factored in that it is going to take like maybe 5 hours per day of your time. So what would you have to say to sort of prepare founders in regards to the time needed and for them to respect that time to get the results they want in fundraising?
Well, yeah, I mean, you do have to put in the effort. And the reason is every communication needs to be customized to a certain extent. This isn't just a generic, I'm going to blast out my story and everybody's going to come to me and write a check. No, I mean, you have to think, okay, who am I sending this to? How do I respect them? How do I tailor my message to them? You have to have calls, meetings, due diligence. You might need to respond to questions. I mean, so it's a lot of work.
It's time consuming. I have a very, very important one to ask you. Literally everyone I speak to, everyone I've spoken to over the last couple of years at least, always ask the golden question: where do we find the investors? So Brad, where do you find seed investors? Where are they?
What's that movie, Love Actually? It's all around you. I mean, and I mean that really. Obviously, there are certain places where investors are more plentiful. Northern California, for example, there's a lot of investors. It depends on where you're at. So if you're lucky enough to live in a place where there's a lot of activity, people that have started and sold businesses and now they have basically money that they want to recycle, that's great. Now, you just need to fish where the fish are, is what we say. You need to identify, okay, what is the ideal source of the capital? So let's say that you're a medical device company and you're focused on diabetes, for example. I think ideally you'd want to get people that understand diabetes. So it could be people who understand the science, endocrinologists. It could be people who have family members or maybe even themselves who suffer from diabetes. So those are, people that understand the space. They can hopefully add some value. They're passionate about it and they have money. And they have money that they're willing to invest in an early stage company. So how do you do it? You identify the so-called ideal profiles, and then you figure out how can I get in touch with those people? You may need to go to industry events. You may need to, through LinkedIn or otherwise, join groups. You try to get a couple, 3 well-connected, say, angels who then have their own network. Because even though I might be able to convince somebody to personally invest, the second question is that person then willing to risk their own reputation and political capital to expand that opportunity more broadly? It's not a given. I mean, you might think, oh, well, if so-and-so invested, then they're going to open the Rolodex and introduce me to all their friends. That's not always true. First of all, it's time consuming for them to do it. And secondly, there's reputational risk, and when you introduce a deal to another person, if the deal goes well, it's great. You've just gained political capital. If the deal doesn't go well, and let's be honest, in the startup world, statistically, more than half fail, then maybe they're not going to consider you such a great friend, right? I mean, that's just how the real world works.
Yeah, absolutely. Because quite often you hear that if you have, some lead angels, lead investors on board, It's a lot easier for you to raise capital because those lead investors may have contacts. They can introduce you to other investors. But it sounds like what you're saying is that you can't just rely upon that because there is a risk that the lead investor is taking by introducing your startup. How it's probably not a good idea to just rely upon the lead investor, although it's advantageous to have lead investors on board because they potentially will have contacts that they can introduce you to for your next round. But it sounded like what you're saying is it doesn't make sense to just rely on your lead investors' contacts. So Brad, how would you go about putting together a good prospect list that's made up of, angel investors and VCs in today's climate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is truly a sales and marketing thing, right? And so just as you would do if you were trying to sell whatever your product, your service is, you would say, okay, who's the ideal customer? What is their contact information? How do they want to be approached? And then you come up with the list, the prospect list, just like a business development thing, and then you go through it. Now, how do you develop it? Research on the internet. You might need to join some networks. You might need to try to expand it by presenting in front of, say, angel networks. There's a lot of those. You could go to, for example, at our website, we have some free resources. We call it the Global Investor Database, which is just an open source of a variety of different lists that we curate, make available, and it's all open source. So there's a lot of stuff. But then if you're really serious about it, honestly, most people will invest in doing some kind of a proprietary database search. We do it where, for a fee, we query a database, a professional database that are expensive, come up with, the fields, what's the industry, the stage, the geography, and then generate, a complete prospect list that you then go to. Now, what we find is that for some people, I don't know why, but there seems to be, I think it's fear of rejection or fear, I don't want to spam these people. So you got to do the work to generate the list, but you also got to work the list, and so it is a numbers game. And you got to constantly add to the list, so, you go to an event, let's say you went to Web Summit, or let's say, I'm in Switzerland this week, Davos, you want to go up there and hang around with all the, the people that are going to make the world a better place, or, and I've been to that event and there's a lot of interesting people there. So what are you going to do with all those contacts? Well, you got to come home, put them on the list. This is why it's so time consuming. Then you got to communicate with them. Hey, it was nice to meet you. As we discussed, here's my teaser. Would you be interested in having a follow-up? So this is how you do it. And then you just keep working the list. And then you also, if you have a meeting with somebody, ask them, do you know anyone else that you think I should talk to, right? If you don't ask, they aren't just going to volunteer it. Come on, it takes time. But if you're just constantly in sales mode, looking for the right source of capital, that's how the people who are successful do it.
So while a founder is in that process of approaching and engaging investors, I do think it's a valid concern in regards to how much engagement you should have with them, because I imagine they are being contacted by other founders who are pitching them their ideas as well. What would you say, in your opinion, is a healthy number in terms of if it's a cold lead or is someone that you've met for the first time? How many times should you follow up with them before you kind of give them a bit of space?
Until they say no, or please quit spamming me. I would say, within reason, but myself, I don't know how people contact me sometimes. A lot of times it's through LinkedIn, which I don't even check on a daily basis. But if it's a compelling, outreach, and they say, hey, this is why I'm contacting you specifically, that's more likely to get somebody to pay attention to it. something where you know they just sent this to like 100 people and it's essentially just spam, right? Obviously, if somebody says, don't contact me, then you need to remove them from the list. And a lot of people, they don't really advertise. Angel investors in particular may not advertise because they don't want to be spam. They just rely on their own sort of deal flow and they're okay with that. Enough good deals come across their screen without them having to advertise. They don't want people to contact them cold. But if you do contact them cold and they're in the right mood, you never know. They might take the call.
No, that's quite valuable. In fact, I think we mentioned this in our investor prospecting guide, the ebook that we have available. It does cover some of this, best practices and how to engage with investors. But I do want to ask you also, what are the things that founders should look out for in terms of what they put on their pitch deck to get the attention of, a seed investor? And the reason I ask this is because some of the founders that I've spoken to who are in this process, and this is just my opinion, but they don't necessarily have the healthiest company valuation. And I do think that will have a huge impact on how the seed investor sees their offer. What are your thoughts on that, Brad?
Okay, you're saying that when we talk to some people, they have an unreasonable expectation about their valuation. First of all, you wouldn't necessarily have to communicate what your valuation expectation is on the front end. That's typically something you would discuss once you've determined that they are interested at any valuation, right? So first, you got to convince them, think of it as, let's say you're buying a fancy Swiss watch. Do they want a Swiss watch? If they don't want a Swiss watch, it doesn't matter how expensive it is. But if they do decide, oh, I do want a Swiss watch, well, right here, living in Switzerland, there are hundreds of Swiss watches at various price points, everything from a couple $100 to a couple $1 million. I guess getting back to, what is the right valuation? Well, it really depends on the company. But like we already said, for a seed round, typically a round of 2 to 5 million, typically the dilution would be somewhere between 10 on the low side, 10%, and as high as 25 or even 30. I think 30 is a bit high, but probably on average, it's, let's just say 17 to 23% is probably pretty average.
And does the offer differ? So as a founder, the offer I make to an angel investor, will that be the same offer that I make to an institutional investor, like a family office or a micro VC?
This is the thing. When you're out raising using, for example, safes and convertible notes, that's one instrument. But keep in mind, when you're selling a safe, which is kind of a warrant to convert in at a later stage when there's a bigger round, like a seed round, or convertible debt, it's convertible into what? It's convertible into something. It's typically converted at the seed round. So all of these instruments get converted into, let's just say, Series Seed. In the old days, a Series A. But in the modern era, this Series Seed popped up as a pre-Series A real round of financing. Okay, so it's typically, in the U.S., you would call it Series Seed, which is basically a preferred stock light. It has a lot of the same bells and whistles as the Series A, but maybe not all the bells and whistles, right? It's light. Yeah, that's typically what you would sell in a seed round. On the other hand, you were just saying, what if you're just, talking to some angels? Well, so some of the people that we work with, they run into this issue. They're out there, they're selling, safes, for example.
So, sorry, Brad. So when you say safe, you're referring to a simple agreement for future equity.
Right. A simple agreement for future equity has been around for about 10 years. Technically, it's not debt and it's not equity. It's a simple agreement for future equity. And I think it's typically treated like a warrant, like an option, right? But it has some protection to the investor that if and when you do the series round, let's say there's a post-money cap, let's say you're raising money at a post-money cap of 8 or 10 or something like that. When you do the seed round, maybe the valuation is 30 million. The SAFE converts in to a Series C that is identical in all respects to the new investors, with the exception that the price they pay is no higher than, let's say, a post-money value of 8 or 10. So I won't, without getting into all the details, what's different is the liquidation preference is slightly less for the SAFE than it would be for the new money, because if the new money is paying $1 a share and you're paying, say, 30 cents a share, the liquidation preference would typically never be more than the original quote price paid. But having said all that, that's the security that you're typically selling. Now, if you're out there and you're selling these safes and all of a sudden somebody pops up and says, maybe it's a small institution, I'll invest $1 million or $2 million. Okay, well, that's interesting. Is now the time to stop selling safes and immediately go to Series Seed?
Maybe. Right. So is a safe used for seed rounds? Is that typically what's used for seed rounds?
Not typically. Typically, the seed round is when all the safes get converted.
So perhaps the pre-seed is when the safe is used.
Pre-seed is where you typically use the safes or convertible notes.
That makes sense.
But like I said, so you're out there, you're pitching. I mean, actually, we have a company right now that's in this, and they've been taking down chunks of money and 100 grand here and 250 whatever. And then boom, all of a sudden, somebody appears and says, "Oh, yeah, I like it. I want $1 million." Wow, okay, that's good. That's nice. Do you want to invest $1 million in a safe? Maybe not. They might say, no, actually, what we want to do is invest in Series Seed, and now everything converts. I mean, maybe that's the right time to do, or maybe you just say, hey, sorry, we're still selling safes. That's all you get. You stop the fundraising, and now you move to Series Seed, and then you go through the process again, because now you're probably looking at a different ideal profile of investor than you were when you were just trying to raise, pre-seed.
Safes are used typically for pre-seeds, and then they're converted by the seed round. What offers typically used at the seed round?
Again, I'm U.S. centric, so in the U.S., the instrument that people tend to use it's called the Series Seed, which is basically sometimes people want to use what are called the National Venture Capital Association model documents, which are a little bit heavier than the Series Seed. But whether you use the Series Seed or the NACPA or something like that, basically it's a junior preferred stock. In the old days, they were called Series A, but then everyone started like, oh, well, we don't want to call it Series A because when we do raise money down the road, we want to call it a Series A. So we're going to call it the seed round, and now everyone just accepts that. Really, the Series A round isn't the first outside round of institutional capital. It's now typically the second.
Okay. So Brad, help me out. Where would founders go to find these documents or templates? I mean, who should they be approaching? Is it a lawyer? Is it an advisor? I mean, where do they get
Well, yeah, anytime you're selling securities, you got to make sure you comply with the relevant securities laws. So you got to have a deal lawyer on your team. You don't want to do this without assistance of counsel. I strongly discourage that. Yeah.
This is actually, it's a good time we've raised this because this has come up before in other episodes, a securities lawyer or having legal counsel when you're fundraising. How important is that, especially for a seed round?
It's indispensable in my view, and I'm a lawyer myself. I would never do it without a lawyer. I mean, nobody who knows what they're doing does this without a good lawyer on your side of the team. Why? Because you got to get it right, and there's credibility associated with it. Because essentially the law firm, the good law firms, they bring some value, some discipline, and some credibility. It's indispensable to have somebody who knows what they're doing on your side of the table.
Have you had any experience of engaging with a startup that has raised a pre-seed round or a seed round without using a lawyer?
Yep.
So what are the risks? What's the downside to doing that?
The biggest downside is It's not that hard to do it right if you know what you're doing, but it's easy to make mistakes if you don't. And fixing the mistakes is extremely expensive. So if somebody made a mistake, even though the company's a good company, but there's a whole bunch of problems, and that's a deal killer. And it happens. I've seen that actually quite a few times, unfortunately.
So where should a founder go if they're thinking about fundraising? They've been successful in a pre-seed. Maybe they've raised it from friends, families, and some people in their network, and they're considering a seed round. Where would they go to find a good securities lawyer?
It's word of mouth. I mean, typically in any town, where are these deal lawyers? So let's say, for example, you live in North Dakota. I just bring this up with all due respect to North Dakota. It's not exactly a tech center. There's not a lot of deals that are getting started there or funded there. So how do you get the expertise? Do you have to get the local North Dakota lawyer? And if so, who? There's probably a group of, good lawyers in North Dakota that know how to do it, but you would want to, do your research. Now, if you get into a place like, let's say you're in Stockholm, I mean, there's tons of competent firms that know how to do it. Not a problem. London, places like that. So it's just like surgery. I mean, if I'm going to get knee surgery, I'm not going to some general practitioner who's done 2 of them. I'm going to an expert that's done like 300 of them. That's what you want. You want somebody that has done a lot of deals, and they're not going to learn at your expense. Now, okay, so I guess in terms of who are these lawyers with the expertise? There's basically the big firms, most big international law firms have this capability, clearly. Now, are they interested in working with some, pre-seed startup? A lot of them will do it. Maybe they have a special startup package, but, it's really not where they make their money. They make their money doing, later stage deals. So they might throw some associates at you and, treat you as a pet project, which is fine. The other places, you got the mid-sized firms. They may not have the high deal flow, but they have competent people. Sometimes the mid-sized firms are people that used to work at one of the bigger firms with higher deal flow. And that can be fine as long as they know what they're doing. Or the one that I kind of like is what I call the big firm refugees. People that got in there, let's be honest, practicing law as a corporate lawyer is a dog's life if you're in a big firm. It just is. And so some people do it their whole life, but some people do it for 5, 10 years, 15 years, and just say, I don't want to do that. And then so there may be these boutique firms of people that are very competent, and they'll do it competently and at a much lower price. And they're more responsive as well, in my experience. So that's where you find the expertise.
While we're on the topic of expertise, some of the startups founders that I've spoken with and engaged with over the years, only I'd say probably 20% have been through an accelerator. These accelerators do tend to have their own lawyers on board when they work with the startups. So and again, we're talking about raising around 100,000 thereabouts, right, from an accelerator. When the founder leaves the accelerator and they go in to raise more funds, should they be relying on the accelerator's lawyer, or will they need to find their own lawyer?
Well, usually the accelerator lawyer would have a conflict of interest, right? Because they're representing the accelerator. Let's say there's an accelerator that pumps 30 companies out. Some of them do more than that, like, YC, several hundred. But they know which law firms and lawyers are competent. And so a warm referral from them saying, hey, we think that, here's 2 or 3 options for you. We know these lawyers are competent. We trust that they know what they're doing. You could work off of that list. That's a good way to get the referral if they want to do it. But yeah, the lawyers who represent the accelerator would have a conflict of interest, frankly, representing the startup.
There's one final question I want to ask before we sort of conclude this, is how would you say a pre-seed term sheet impacts the seed round?
The pre-seed, assuming it's SAFEs or convertible notes, will convert into the seed round, right? Assuming the pre-seed docs are clean, they shouldn't adversely impact the seed round at all if they were done correctly. If, on the other hand, the way in which the capital was raised prior to the seed round is problematic, that could be a deal killer. It could significantly increase both the time and the expense to go and fix whatever needs to be fixed. Because as a condition to, particularly, these rounds now, the VC funds particularly are doing a lot more due diligence. And they're not just saying, oh yeah, we'll take a flyer. No, I mean, this is Sam Bankman-Fried. Everyone knows that didn't work out very well. I mean, we're still figuring it out, right? So people are like, well, I'm just not going to do it just because a bunch of other people are doing it. Oh yeah, everyone else is doing it. It's all good. No, I think more people are going to say, well, I'm going to do my own diligence. I'm going to make sure there's no hair on this deal. And if there is, we're not going to do the deal unless it's fixed. I think that's the current environment. Is it a good business at any price? Is there hair on the deal? I mean, all this stuff, hopefully if you do it right from get-go, this isn't a problem. A lot of companies do have problems. I mean, I've seen people have to shut down the company and reincorporate. Yeah, because nobody wants to take on the problems of the old co. And that's really a tough deal. But I've seen that, they chinched out. They didn't, have good legal. They did stuff. They downloaded forms from the internet, filled them out. The forms are from, a different jurisdiction, so they don't even work. They didn't do what they were supposed to do to properly authorize the issuance of the securities. They had a dispute with one of the co-founders who's maybe claims that he owns the code. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff, but those are deal killers.
So what would you say to a founder who says, look, I'm just starting out. I don't have any money to hire an expensive lawyer. I'm just going to have to use the resources that I have. Maybe a member of my family works in finance. Maybe he or she can advise me. What advice would you give to someone that's just starting out?
Personally, but this is not just because I'm a flipper myself. I would always advise you to, if you're serious about trying to raise money from third parties, I mean, if you're just going to bootstrap it and you're the sole shareholder, that's a different deal, right? Because you can always fix it because it's just you. But if you are asking third parties to invest money to be a shareholder of your company, you just got to do it right. Personally, and that's just part of the deal. You just got to say, well, I'm going to do it right. I'm of the view the deal where if you're going to try and raise money from third parties and you're not competent to do this yourself, you should always have somebody on your side of the table that is competent.
That makes complete sense. So I know a lot of the things that we've covered here is maybe news to some founders that are actually preparing their seed round, but the main purpose of this podcast was to shed some light on this matter and to provide some insights, so they can do it the right way. So Brad, I'd just like you to, if you can, just give a conclusion of the things to look out for and to prepare for in 2023 when it comes to raising a seed round.
The most important thing is that, fortunately, there's still a tremendous, indeed a record amount of capital, dry powder, that has been amassed with a view to be deployed. And in terms of the total dry powder, the amount that gets invested into the seed stage, the early stage, is typically around 10%. In Europe, I think, what is that going to mean? It'd be somewhere around $4 to say $6 billion this year will be invested in Europe in the early stage. So there's a lot of money out there. The deal terms are probably a little more investor friendly right now than they were, 2 years ago. People are going to, do more due diligence. So make sure you have your ducks in a row. And don't underestimate how many times you're going to have to pitch before you get to yes. I mean, it's going to, and don't be discouraged. All it takes is, one yes to change, the company's balance sheet in a significant way. Are you going to have 100 meetings to get to yes? Maybe more, But once you get traction, then it's like a snowball, then you can start to aggregate. Okay, I can see there's other people who I respect that are in this. And then all of a sudden, like a snowball, it just starts to aggregate and boom, you get to closure. But you got to get the first 1, 2, 3. If it's an angel, smart angels, not just dumb people like, oh, I got my uncle to invest because he likes me. Okay, great. That's not that helpful. It's not bad, but it's not going to be compelling to smart money investors. And the other thing about this, investors are kind of like sheep, in my experience, and so they frequently want to know who else is in the deal. Is somebody smarter than me who knows more about this? Are they in the deal? Because, that's how it works.
So it sounds like it's really about perseverance. To get that snowball effect, you have to just keep on going because you're going to get a lot of no's. For the seed round, you are going to get no's from investors before you get that yes, right?
Yeah.
So Brad, quite often you've referred to sheep investors while we've been having this conversation. So what exactly is a sheep investor and what's the alternative to a sheep investor?
Yeah, I suppose the term sheep investor, it's kind of pejorative in a way, but basically it's a follower. If you think of a shepherd and his flock, in the startup and emerging growth ecosystem, there are people who are widely respected. And if they say, hey, I like this deal, I'm going to put my own money in, these are the reasons why I like it, then other people will be like, oh, well, that person has an amazing track record. I trust and respect what they're saying. And so I'm going to go along. I'm going to be the sheep and I'm going to invest, not because I personally know that it's a good deal, but because somebody who I like and respect believes it's a good deal, and I'll go along for the ride. And so that's what the shepherd investor, the lead investor, can do. They can galvanize, be the catalyst to bring in a whole bunch of other people. And the other thing I would just say about the catalyst or the shepherd and the sheep, sometimes you'll have people that are lead angel investors who also decide on this deal I'm the sheep. I'm just somebody else who I respect in their domain. They say, hey, this is a good deal. And so I'm just along for the ride. So I have personally played both roles. When you start to get into particularly areas of science or deep tech, which require a lot of knowledge and expertise, for somebody like myself, who's more of a generalist, I'd never act as a lead. I don't know. You got to know that if it's science, the science at the end of the day has to be good. It has to be innovative. And if the science isn't any good, the company's got to fail. Or Theranos, you can lie about it and go to jail. But sooner or later, people are going to find out, is the science good or is the technology good?
And in fact, I think and correct me if I'm wrong here, does this mean that there will be less sheep investors in the current climate because investors are being more diligent now?
I think so, yeah, because I've already, some of the people that I've co-invested with, when they look at deals now, they're just like, why would I do that? I'm going to have my money locked up for 3 to 10 years, no liquidity. So I'm going to do that. I might as well just invest in the public market. And that's right. That's true. Especially with the valuations in the public market having come down. Why not? Get out of the illiquid asset class and get into the liquid asset class and don't worry about liquidity. So yeah, short answer is I think a lot of the tourists, that's another pejorative way of, the tourists are going to vacate. Now it's going to be a lot more of the pros, the people that are serious, the people that participate through thick and thin, and the Johnny-come-lately, the tourists, the sheep, they're going to go and play in a different arena or just, not play at all.
So typically, Brad, when one's in a seed round, we could ask the question, is it better to have multiple investors on board for your seed round, or is it better to just have maybe one or two that give the high ticket? I mean, in your experience,
Better for who?
better for the startup.
Better for the startup? I'm of the view that you're better off with more investors. Why? Because the investors will keep each other honest. If you do need to go back to the well, particularly with angel deals, you see this a lot. So maybe you have 20 angels in your deal and now the company needs to raise more money. This happens a lot. If you only have, say, 3 hats to pass, now you've only got, say, if you start with 3 and 1 says no, now you're down to 2. And if 2 say no, then you're down to 1, and then that person feels like an idiot. And so then you're going to have problems. If, on the other hand, you start with, say, 20 and even half say no, which isn't good, but it wouldn't be uncommon that some people just say, hey, look, I invested, I'm not investing anymore, unless somebody can convince me that it's a smoking deal. So a lot of people, for portfolio diversification, whatever, there's a million reasons why, especially with an angel, because they're dealing with their own personal money, they would just say, no, I'm not doing it. But you have more opportunities to raise additional capital. I just think in general, even if you're raising with institutions, you're better off with more than one. Typically, I think it's greed on the part of the institution to try and be the sole person on the cap table. And from time to time in a frothy market, you'll see VCs like, oh, we want to take the whole round or something. But the VCs also, they know that in general, syndication is a good thing. It tends to be good to have, more than one firm for all the same reasons. Yeah, I'm not saying you want this crowdfunding thing where you might end up with 200-300 small investors. Be careful of that. Typically those are structured so that those investments get aggregated into a SPV who really acts as one shareholder on behalf of the group. But I'm not suggesting that you want to create a cap table with hundreds, but I do think for pre-seed, seed, I wouldn't be afraid of a cap table with 15, 20, 25. It's manageable.
And when you mention an SPV, you're referring to a special purpose vehicle?
Right.
Okay, brilliant. So that brings us to the end of our episode today. I want to thank you all for watching. And I want to remind you, don't forget to subscribe, tick the bell button so you are notified of new episodes. But more importantly, make a comment. Let us know what you thought about this particular episode, if you found it valuable, if there's any questions that we didn't actually cover on this particular episode. We are likely to review all of your comments and potentially bring them up, or even do a new episode covering that topic. Thank you for joining. Share with your friends, your colleagues, and anyone who's at the seed stage. And more importantly, share it with founders that you may know that are at the pre-seed stage so they can make the provision that's needed to have a successful seed round. And we'll look forward to seeing you again on the next episode.